Hello class, this is the first in 3 lectures on participles, and today we're going to learn about the present participle. So we're going to talk about the morphology, how it's formed, how it functions, and how to translate present participles. So the key points that I want to hit in this lecture are listed here. We want to define a participle, and a participle is a verbal adjective. We want to talk about morphology. Participles are built on verbs, but there's an added participle morpheme that transforms it into a participle. And there are case endings because it is an adjective. So it truly is a verbal adjective. Participles can be used either adjectivally or adverbially. And finally, a participle communicates primarily verbal aspect and not time of action. But the time of action in translation is determined by the surrounding context around that participle, primarily the tense of the main verb within the sentence or clause. This is just a little funny that gets us thinking about the idea of dangling participles. A dangling participle occurs when you order a sentence in a confusing way, or more specific, where the participle is not clearly being connected to the noun that it is modifying. For example, on the left you see this sentence. After rotting in the cellar for weeks, my brother brought up some oranges. The misplacement of that participle phrase, after rotting in the cellar for weeks, makes us think that the person's brother is a zombie who was rotting in the cellar for weeks, and he emerged from the cellar bringing up some oranges. A better way of expressing this is, my brother brought up some oranges that had been rotting in the cellar for weeks. And there it's clear, the oranges are what's rotting, not the brother. Fortunately, in Greek, we don't have the same phenomena of dangling participles. It's very clear in a Greek sentence what that participle is modifying, because it must agree, if it's acting as an adjective, it must agree with the noun or pronoun that it's modifying in case, gender, and number. So what is a participle? And this little funny kind of explains to us how we get participles. Angela, adjective, and Vernon, verb, got married. And when they got together, they had a kid who was named Patty, participle. So the verb and the adjective got together to create a participle. A participle is a verbal adjective that has characteristics of a verb. It's built from a verb. So we take verbs, the stem of verbs, and we transform them into participles. It depicts an action that's happening. It has tense, just like the verbs we've learned so far. There is voice involved. So tense, today we're learning about present tense. Next class we'll learn about aorist tense participles, and then finally perfect tense participles. There are no imperfect participles in the Greek New Testament, and only a few future participles. So we're really not going to touch on those because they're very rare. A participle does have voice. It can be active, middle, or passive. And it can take direct objects. Just like a verb, we can have direct objects. So it can have adverbs. So there can be words that describe the nature of the action of the participle. So it's like a verb. What about mood? Participles really don't have a mood. So far we've dealt with the indicative mood verbs. And that's been the mood that we've said. Participles really don't have mood because they're not really true verbs in the sense that they have person and number involved. I mean, they're not personal, they don't have personal endings, so they're not like indicative verbs. So they really don't have a mood, but when you're parsing it, in the place of mood, just say, this is a participle. We'll get to that. Like an adjective, a participle can modify a noun or pronoun, and it can also act like a noun. So remember last week when we talked about adjectives, we talked about their attributive function. We also talked about their substantival function. So these participles, like adjectives, can do both. So it has case, it has gender, and it has number. So in case, it can be anywhere from nominative to accusative. It has gender, it can be, so genitive, dative, accusative. It can be plural or singular. No, not gender. Singular or plural, and it comes in masculine, feminine, and neuter forms because it must agree with the noun it's modifying in case, gender, and number. So here's an example of English participle, how English participles act. So here's the sentence. While eating, the Greek teacher recited the Greek alphabet. So what's underlined there is what's called a participle phrase. And notice it has an ing on the end. So that's how English participles operate. While eating, the Greek teacher recited the Greek alphabet. So that is acting kind of adverbially. It's telling us what was happening, what action accompanied the teacher's recitation of the Greek alphabet. So that's what's happening there. Okay, while eating, the Greek professor recited the Greek alphabet. Now, English participles are marked as ing words, but we can also add ed to the end, primarily when it's acting passively. So moved by the lecture, the students cried. Might not happen in my class, but there you go. There's an example of a participle telling you again maybe the reason why the students cried or the circumstances around their crying. They were moved by the lecture. So that's an example of an ed added to a verb to make it a participle. Here's an example of another English participle. So this is a picture of one of my Greek classes from many, many years ago. This is the day that they received their Greek New Testaments, and they're all standing there smiling, which is encouraging to me. And so I'm the guy in the back row here. That's me before I had my beard. So the short man, and of course, look, I'm short, standing in the back row is my Greek teacher. So this one is acting as a true adjective, telling us a little bit about the short man. You could have said the short man in the back row is my Greek teacher. The short man is my Greek teacher, but we want to give a few more details here. So the short man standing in the back row is my Greek teacher. Just a note on terminology. In English, we have participles, and we also have gerunds. Now, gerunds are when a participle-like construction acts like a noun. So let's say I was to say studying Greek is fun. Okay, what am I doing there? That's actually acting as a noun, linked together with this verb of being and an adjective describing that it's fun. So studying Greek is fun. There, the participle is acting like a noun, and we call that a gerund in English. But Greek doesn't use this terminology. The participle acts both as an English participle and an English gerund, all in one. Okay, let's talk about the morphology of a present participle. So the present participle is formed in this way. We begin with the present tense stem. So the stem of a verb that's used in the present tense. We add a connecting vowel, and it's always omicron. And we add a noon tau. That's what's called the participle morpheme. Just think of it as the marker for a participle. Okay, if you see this, chances are it is a participle. And then this is the case ending. And this example is masculine nominative plural. Okay, masculine nominative plural. And we just translate for now as loosing because we don't know its context. Context helps us to translate participles with more precision. But for now, just translate it like an ing word. Luontes, loosing. So let's walk through the pieces of the puzzle here. First thing is that the present participle is built on the present tense stem. And we can luo, I loose, luontes, blepo, blepontes, pistuo, pistuontes. I want to talk now about the next thing, which, well, there's the connecting vowel, which is always an omicron, so connecting vowel. And then we have what's called the participle morpheme. And this is that tiny little marker that goes after the verb stem and connecting vowel and prior to the endings to indicate that it is a participle. So in the active forms of the participle, it's a noon tau in the masculine and the neuter. And in the feminine, it's an usa. So for the feminine forms, the connecting vowel is actually part of the morpheme. It's not an added omicron, it's just usa. There's far more happening here with this morpheme that's a little bit more complicated, but let's just treat it as usa. And then in the middle, and just like the present indicative, the middle and the passive have the same form. So the morpheme for the masculine and the neuter is mena, and the feminine is mene. Here's the paradigm of the case endings. Last week we were talking about adjectives and the different declension patterns for adjectives. Participles have similar variation in declension patterns. So the active voice of a present participle follows a 3-1-3 pattern. So the masculine forms are declined according to the pattern of the third declension. The feminine forms are declined according to the first declension, and the neuter forms are declined according to the third declension. So we can see that here. Luon, luontos, luusa, luuses. And this is an example of like a feminine noun, an alternative alpha form that in the genitive and the dative singular switches to an eta from an alpha. But it's alpha all the way through except for those two forms. And finally the neuter, luon and luontos. So like when we get to the middle in passive, it switches to a more familiar 2-1-2 pattern. So we see verb stem, connecting vowel, participle morpheme, and the endings. So luomenos, sigma, luomenu, genitive, and so on and so forth. So that's like a second declension masculine. The feminine is like a first declension feminine, and it's eta in the singular and alpha in the plural. The neuter is like a second declension neuter. So luomenon, luomenu. So here's the full paradigm that I wanted to show you. This is using luo. Luon, luontos, luonti, luonta. The feminine, luusa, luuses, luuse, luusan. And finally the neuter, luon, luontos, luonti, luon. Well, what's happening here? Like third declension nouns, the key areas of change are in the masculine and the neuter singular forms. What's happening to the noon tau here? Well, let's walk through the nominative, the masculine nominative singular. So you have Lu plus Omicron plus noon tau. And then you have, in this case, a zero ending. No endings added. So you get Lu, and you get this, and the tau drops. Okay? And to compensate for that loss of the letter, the Omicron lengthens to an omega. So you get Luon. But you see the noon tau all the way through in the rests. The same thing is happening over here with the neuter. Ont, zero ending, Lu, on. But there's no compensatory lengthening of this Omicron to an omega. It just stays the way it is. And why is that? I don't know. My guess is to show a distinction between the neuter form and the masculine form. The feminine forms are familiar to you, just like a first declension noun. One thing to look out for is the alpha switches to an eta in the genitive and the dative singular. So here are the plural forms. So luantes for the masculine, luantes, luanton, luusin, luantas. For the neuter, luanta, luanton, luusin, and luanta. And the feminine, luusai, luuson, luusais, luusas. So everything's as it should be here. Verb stem, connecting vowel, noon tau, and the epsilon sigma for the nominative plural. Same with the genitive plural. And what's happening here is an interesting thing. So the dative plural for both the masculine and the neuter behave like this. So you get lu, you get omicron, you get noon tau, and you get sin of the dative plural ending. So that happens, and the sigma knocks the noon and the tau out of the way. And to compensate for this loss of letters, the omicron lengthens to an omicron upsilon. So you get lu, ooh, sin. With the neuter, the only difference is you have an alpha here as the nominative and the accusative plural ending. The feminine straightforward, lu'u, and the lu'usai, on, ice, and the accusative plural. Don't get these two forms mixed up. They end the same, but their internal mechanism is a bit different. Let's walk through the middle, and the middle is pretty easygoing, and it follows a pattern that you know already. The first pattern of nouns that you learned when you learned. So this is like logos, this is like agape, and this is like ergon. So you know the paradigms for these nouns. You'll know the paradigms for your present, middle, and passive. So lu, verb stem, connecting vowel. The participle morpheme is meno, and you add a sigma. The feminine, verb stem, connecting vowel. The participle morpheme is mene, and then you add your endings. And the neuter, verb stem, connecting vowel, participle morpheme, and the noon ending. And here are the plural forms. Same thing happening here. It's a 2-1-2 pattern and normal ending. The middle and the passive forms are not as challenging as the active forms were, because it's a pattern that you know, and there's no unusual changes that you're seeing happening as you did with the active forms. This is the participle, present participle of emi. It's a 3-1-3 pattern. And what do you see here? You see that they very much look like just the endings that were placed on the end of the verb to make a participle. So luon, lu, the masculine, lu, usa, and lu, on, neuter. Emi is not hard to memorize. Just note that it's the endings that you're learning already. Let's take a look at the plural forms. The plural forms is the same thing that's happening here. It's a 3-1-3, and it's the endings that you see on the end of the present active participle forms. I'm going to go and show you a few examples of me as a participle in action. So this first example is from Revelation 1:7, and it's describing Jesus as the one who is, and the one who was, and the one who is coming. Okay, so this is a nominative, masculine, singular, present participle of me, the one who is. And the one who was. Now this is me, but it's imperfect, indicative, active. It didn't use, an aorist participle could not be used here because it implies kind of completed action. Jesus' existence is not completed, so it's ongoing. Okay, there's ongoing action in the past, in process. So they used a finite verb here. And the one who is coming, that's erkomai. And here we see an example of a masculine, nominative, singular, but it's present middle, and because it's a middle only verb, erkomenos. The one who is, the one who was, and the one who is coming. This is the first line of the letter to the Philippians, and it contains the typical way that Paul starts his letters, and that is with the letter greeting. So the people who are sending the letter, Paul and Timothy, and they're in the nominative case. So the person sending the letter or writing the letter is the addressee, and Paul describes both of them as slaves of Christ Jesus. Okay, so that's A to B, and the B part are the recipients, and that's in the dative case. Pasin tois hagios en Christo Jesu tois usin en Philippois. Okay, a lot happening here. This is the word for all. To all the holy ones, to all, or the saints, in Christ Jesus, to the ones who are, okay, in Philippi. Okay, so there you have a dative, plural, present participle used in this construction of a nominative to be in the dative. This next slide describes how we parse participles, and it's a bit different because it combines both the aspects of talking about adjectives and verbs. I've got a few examples here. So luon, first we want to talk about the lexical form, that is the verb that it's built on, and this is from luo. And the tense of this participle is present, its voice is active, the mood, it's a non-indicative, so it doesn't really have a mood, but we just, in that category, we say it's a participle. Its gender is masculine. We can tell from the ending that it's masculine, it's nominative, its case is nominative, and its number is singular. So, lexical form, tense, voice, and mood, noting it's a participle. Its gender, its case, and number. So kind of giving information that's verbal, in giving information that's like an adjective. I want to end off things by talking about how participles are used within Greek sentences. To summarize, they have two possible uses, adjectivally or adverbially. When they act like an adjective, it can either modify a noun or pronoun, that means it be attributive, or act as a substantival. It acts like a noun. Participles can also have an adverbial use. And when it functions like an adverb, it tells us something. It modifies the action of the main verb. So I want to give you an example of the use that we see in the Greek New Testament of participles. So this is from the woman at the well passage in John chapter 4. Jesus is talking about special water. The woman asks, "Pothen un ekes ta huder ta zon." This is the participle, and it's from zao, nominative, neuter, singular. Why do we get this omega there? Well, remember, za, and you have a connecting vowel, and that produces an omega. So that's what's happening here. So that's a lesson to us. Contract verbs will contract with the connecting vowel. So that's something to watch for. So from where do you have or do you get ta huder ta zon, the living water? So there it's acting attributively. How do we see that? Article, we see the article and the noun, huder. We see the article and the participle. Okay, so that's an attributive position. That's the second attributive position. This could have also been expressed in this way. Ta zone huder could have been expressed that way. Article, participle, and noun. That happens in passages too, and that's the first attributive position. This is an example of a participle acting like a noun, a substantive. This is from the parable of the sower. So here in the Greek, idou ex eilthen ha speron sperai. That's an interjection. Behold, or look. Here's your main verb, ex eilthen. It's a second aorist. So he went out. He went out. This is your participle, and it's from the verb spero, to sow. And this is an infinitive. We'll get to those later on. But he went out to do something. He went out to sow. So he went out to sow. And this is the subject of the sentence in the nominative form. So a sower, the sower went out to sow. He went out to sow. Moving on from the adjectival use, I want to talk about the adverbial use, and that's when it modifies a verb, acting like an adverb, telling us about something about the action of the main verb of the sentence. So this is the calling of the fishermen, and we read this in the Greek text. Kai paragon para tein thalasan tes Galileas, Aiden Simona kai Andrean ton adelphon Simonos. The main verb of the sentence is Aiden. He saw. So Jesus saw Simon and Andrew. And Andrew happens to be the brother of Simon Peter. So he saw Simon and Andrew, Simon's brother. So that's kind of the main idea of the sentence. But telling you some adverbial details that tell us kind of what were the circumstances behind his seeing, or what was happening when he saw Simon and Andrew. Present participle here is from parego, to walk alongside or to go alongside of something. We see that this participle in the nominative case, and adverbials will tend to be in the nominative case. We see it's nominative, we see that it's masculine, and that it's singular. There's no article in front of it. That's another signal that you're dealing with an adverbial participle. So it's describing Jesus's actions while he was passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, or while passing along the sea of Galilee. He saw Simon, Andrew, and Simon's brother. Okay, this is a set of slides detailing the way that adverbial participles can be used. First example is a temporal participle. That means it indicates the time when an action happened in conjunction with the main verb. We translate it with the markers of while or as or even when. Tauta apen en synagoge didaskon en Capernaum. So he said these things in a synagogue while teaching in Capernaum. Another type of adverbial participle is causal, and that is when the participle is telling you the cause for the action of the main verb, why the main verb is happening. Here's an example from Acts 9. Kai pantes ephobunto auton me pistuantes hoti estin methetes. Context: Paul has just converted to Christianity. The persecutor of the church has just become a Christian, and there was a bit of suspicion around Paul because he had been such a force against the church, and now he was very much serving the Lord. So this is describing the reaction of some of the believers in the church. Kai pantas ephobounto auton, and all were afraid of him. Okay, this is phobeomai. It is in the imperfect, and the imperfect middle, because it's a middle ending. It's a middle only. And all were afraid of him, me pistuantes. Now, we could simply not believing, and many English translations presented that, not believing that he was a disciple, methetes. But this could also be treated causally. Why were they all afraid of him? We could go because, or what this English translation has done is chosen for to explain. For they did not believe that he was a disciple. And this is another point that I want to bring up. Indicative verbs that we've learned already are negated with u. All non-indicatives, including participles, so non-indicatives, like participles, are negated with another particle called may. That's what we're seeing here. That's both those mean not, and one is used with indicative verbs and one is used with non-indicatives. This is an example of it being used with a participle. So please note that when you're translating, that may is used with participles to negate. Another type of adverbial participle tells you the means by which an action was performed. So here's your main verb. We toiled, we labor. How do we labor? We labor by working with our own hands. But this is the guy we want to talk about. It's a verb. It's ergads omai. It's a middle only. And here we see middle ending, and we see it's in the nominative plural because it's nominative because it's acting adverbially, but it's plural because the person and number of the main verb is also plural. It's first plural. So it's modifying the action of this verb. Another type of adverbial participle is one that denotes purpose. So the purpose for an action. So this is in John's Gospel when they run out, they don't have enough food to feed the crowd, and Jesus challenges or tests Philip to see what he would do. And he says, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to provide food for the crowd? It was noted in the text that he was saying this. There's your main verb. He was saying this, parazon auton. This is the verb to test, paradzo, to test or to tempt. And here we have a masculine nominative singular, and it's modifying the action. But how is it modifying the action? Should we simply say, he was saying this, testing him? or he was saying this in order to test him. Okay, so it's telling you the purpose of why Jesus said what he said. He said it in order to test him. And finally, this is one that's not listed in the book, but it's one that I added because it does happen a fair amount, specifically with verbs of saying. So I call it attendant circumstances. So sometimes the participle just simply tells you about action that accompanied the action of the main verb. And so in that case, what we do is, well, I'll show you the example first. Kai pros eilthon auto, hoi mathetai autu, legontes. So let's break this down. There's your main verb. It's pros erkomai in the aorist. And this is the dative, they came to him. Okay? They came to him, who? The hoi mathetai autu, his disciples. So that's your subject. So the subject of the main verb is hoi mathetai. So the disciples came to him, legontes. We could simply go, his disciples came to him saying, but better English translation would be, and his disciples came to him, and, so we add an and said. So we've taken this participle and we've made it into a regular verb, and we've simply put the action of coming along with saying. This is attendant circumstances, and again, context determines the use of all of these different adverbial participles. And that's what makes participles fun, because oftentimes you have to do detective work to kind of see and discern how they're actually modifying the action of the main verb. The last thing I want to touch on is to stress this one key thing about analyzing participles. When we think of verb, at least English speakers, when we think of verbs, we think of in terms of tense, indicating the time of action. So we think of categories of present, future, and past. That element of time of action certainly is part of indicative verbs. But we've also learned in Greek that aspect is also important. The writers of the book describe aspect as the perspective of the author on the action. That's not a bad definition, because that's the nuance that the writer is giving to the action of the verb by putting it in the verb tense he chooses. But I also like to talk about kind of action to help us to wrap our minds. So it's time of action versus kind of action. Time of action, past, present, future. Kind of action has kind of three aspects to it. Imperfective, that means that the verb tense is talking about action that's in process. This is the idea that we get from the present tense. Present participles, the aspect that they would likely reflect is imperfect, progressive action. There's the perfective aspect, and that's looking at the action as a whole, not concerned with its beginning or end or the process in between, but simply looking at the action as it happened and treating it holistically. And we saw this in the aorist tense. So the aorist participles, which we're going to learn about next class, reflect this type of aspect. Finally, there's the stative aspect, which looks at action as completed, but it has results that are ongoing. And we saw this when we learned the perfect tense last week. And so we're going to learn about perfect participles and that the nuance that they have in their participle formation. So think of participles in terms of aspect. Flipping back over here, you might say, okay, that's good when analyzing, but how do you translate? So when we translate a participle, even though the time of action is not described by the participle tense itself, the time of action is determined by the broader context, and that really helps with translation. And typically, the time of action reflects the time frame of the main verb. So if you have a participle in a sentence, even if it's a present participle, and the main verb is an imperfect or an aorist, you will translate that present participle in light of this action. So you'll likely translate it as a past tense, and so on and so forth. Paying attention to the action of the main verb. Okay, that's everything with participles. It's a lot to learn, and we'll unpack it even more in class. Till next time, keep studying, and I'll see you in class.